Let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The panel is the Great Broadband Build-Out, and we're joined, I'm Ronald Sesto, I'm a partner in Morgan Lewis's Telecommunications Media and Technology Group. And we have a great panel of people here to speak with us today. We have Kelly McGriff from Uniti, who's Vice President and General Counsel of the Uniti Group. Deputy General Counsel, sorry, I gave you a promotion there, Kelly, for a second. Milo Medin from Google, who's Wireless Services. Andrew Mincheff, who's Government Relations Director for INCOMPAS, Tony Perkins, who's COO of Fatbeam, and Brandon Reed, Vice President and Underlying Rights of Government Relations for Zayo. Thank you all for joining us today. Why don't we start off with just the panelists telling us about their companies, the businesses that they're doing, and the type of build out that they're involved with. Kelly, why don't you start us off, and then we'll move it along.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ron. Appreciate you hosting us this morning. You know, Uniti Group is a real estate investment trust. We focus on acquiring and constructing and operating fiber and towers, ground leases, things of that nature. Through Uniti Fiber, we provide infrastructure, including cell site backhaul, small cell for wireless operators, Ethernet, wavelengths, and dark fiber for telecom carriers and enterprises. And then through Uniti Leasing, we acquire communications assets and we lease them to anchor customers on an exclusive basis or
Okay, he froze there for a second.
On a shared tenant basis. Entities, or multiple entities in most of the states, and we provide connectivity to most everywhere. If you can hear me.
Great. Yes, we can. Thank you, Kelly.
Good.
I'm gonna do it in the same order as the introduction. So Milo, if you please give us an overview of what you're involved with.
Sure. My team at Google leads a set of efforts around CBRS spectrum and network planning tools that enable operators to go use mid-band spectrum to build a variety of kind of networks, not just cellular, but also fixed wireless, which is a very powerful tool in connecting households inexpensively.
Excellent. Andrew?
All right, thanks, Ron. It's great to be part of the panel today. I'm Government Relations Director at INCOMPAS. Been helping out with federal, state, and local issues related to broadband deployment and really advocating for competition policy across all networks. I've been really honored to be part of the policy team and you know, just looking forward to working with our members. We've accomplished a lot over the past year, getting our members to sign and support the FCC's Keep Americans Connected pledge, to working on the FCC's Broadband Advisory Deployment Committee on disaster response and recovery to help produce a report on best practices faced during the crisis. And we're just really looking to take more positions on legislative and regulatory actions to work on streamlining language and hoping to kind of work and be active on the deployment front. So looking forward to our conversation today with our panelists.
Fantastic. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Fatbeam is a metro fiber provider. We're headquartered up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, but we service 8 Western states and largely have a book of business that focuses on E-rate customers, commercial opportunities, and working with the mobile carriers. Excited to be here and look forward to the conversation today.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And then Brandon.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for hosting this important topic. I'm Brandon Reed. I'm the VP of Underlying Rights and Government Relations for all of North America for Zayo. And just as a disclaimer, anything I say is based on my individual thoughts and unique opinions. So please know that. But a little bit about Zayo. Zayo is headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. And Zayo provides mission critical bandwidth to some of the world's most impactful companies. And that's fueled through our communications infrastructure solutions which are fiber and bandwidth connectivity, co-location, and cloud infrastructure. Zayo has a network of about 133,000 miles in North America and throughout Europe. We have extensive metro connectivity to thousands of buildings and data centers therein. So we're happy to be here and certainly happy to participate with how our perspective can be incorporated as the broadband build out begins.
Great, thanks, Brandy. And that was a good reminder. I should have started with the fact that all of us here are speaking. We're just expressing opinions, not for me, not on behalf of my firm, our clients, and for all of the panelists, not necessarily for their company. We're talking. I wouldn't attribute these to their actual company positions without specific confirmation from them. I know that we do have some press here today. In terms of broadband deployment, there's a lot of obstacles with respect to deploying in the public rights of way. And generally, these can be broken down into 4 categories. You have the permitting process, fees and in-kind services, accessing the infrastructure, and then something that I refer to as kind of specialized infrastructure issues, specialized access and bottleneck issues, kind of like accessing bridges, or whether it's some sort of right of way, a railroad, or something that is a special bottleneck within the local rights of way. In terms of responding to this question, it'd be great if there was some sort of organic conversation between all of you. Why don't I start with Brandon, kind of go in the reverse order of what we did the introductions, but I don't want to necessarily stop anyone from kind of adding to him or just jumping in. I'll certainly call on people as well, but why don't we start with Brandon? If you could kind of relate Zayo's experience with accessing the rights of way and some of the obstacles that you face in those 4 broad categories, or whatever else you think is relevant that are impairing your ability to deploy broadband facilities.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying, first off, through the pandemic, Zayo has worked in a tremendous partnership with not only the leading companies that we represent, but government entities. These entities include wireless, wireline, media, content companies, federal, city, state, local government, finance, healthcare, and other large enterprises. As the demand grew in the wake of the early outbreak, Zayo led innovative efforts to work more closely with the municipalities and agencies to increase that deployment of high capacity dark fiber, wavelength, Ethernet, and connectivity solutions that kept businesses running. And first and foremost, our customers are quite different from a direct to a home customer. We're supporting those backhaul services that are going to those major data centers. We're also supporting redundancy services. So as you think through how a network really operates, and in order for it to keep folks connected, safe, and better supported, you've got to have those redundancies in place and basically a plethora of options for connectivity. So I'd like to start off with that positive note that we've really noticed since the pandemic started, that people are willing and open to working together to make sure that connectivity stays. As we touch on each of these 4 sub-bullets, one thing that just jumps out to me is that as we were facing, office closures, as we were facing the reality of stay-at-home orders, the hard work of telecommunication service providers was that you had to be on the front line and you had to have access to streets, sidewalks, and highways and local byways in order to deploy what evidently became not a need, but a demand. And so when you look at the permitting process, we've already had, and this is pre-COVID, we've already had some experiences where the permitting process is either too opaque, or it's not transparent enough, or it changes based on incoming leadership within local governments. We've also seen fees and in-kind services being used as a way to thwart our ability to go in and negotiate for actual and direct costs, which is what our federal right is. And then in terms of accessing infrastructure, We've done a good, historically, it's been a good relationship going in and working with existing utility providers that have available infrastructure on their poles. But what we've seen is sort of an influx of they're hurting in other areas of their business, and somehow that flows down to what our end effort would be, which would be to attach to an existing pole in order not to put or place more infrastructure inside of a community. And then when you look at the specialized bottlenecks, I mean, this comes from railroad crossings primarily for Zayo, but also bridge and canal crossings. It's very difficult with the current regulatory environment to make things move quickly. And I think as as our objective to get broadband deployment out there and remove obstacles, some of the low-hanging fruit has to be connected to each of these 4 points. And each business has a unique, set of circumstances that may enhance or inhibit their experience with, actually getting to deployment. But the most important thing is that if we don't remove or either align ourselves with where we can find efficiencies, we're going to continue to spin our wheels and perhaps not get as far and as fast as being demanded by the customer usage.
And Tony, what has been your experience in terms of accessing the public rights of way and some obstacles that they present?
Yeah, and when I think about the 4 elements on our thoughts here, permitting, fees, and in-kind, just access to infrastructure, and then specialized bottlenecks, we consistently find that between the 4 of these, there's a pretty rigid set of inconsistency, locale to locale, municipality to municipality, state to state, that really then hampers our ability to be consistent with delivery, creates some challenges project by project, can contribute to the capital costs of deployment, certainly. And so I don't know that I have any of these that really stand out, only because they all stand out. This is a pretty consistent set of obstacles that I think we all face, and any continued effort that we can put forward as individual companies, at the Encompass level, and then up to and including our regulatory entities to assist with consistency, and efforts around that is probably what we look forward to most and put the most emphasis on. We certainly, as we go market to market, project to project, we try to find ways to partner with the entities that we're engaging with. It typically leads to some success, of course, but nonetheless, these are certainly big obstacles we all face. And seemingly COVID, in my opinion, didn't help this much. There were some lack of resources that became available. I think there was, to echo Brandon's point from a moment ago, I think there was some decisions being made at different municipalities in terms of fee and cost structures that have been introduced. So I think in the end, again, we just have to focus on all of these and find ways to be collaborative, but also work to gain some consistency wherever possible.
Milo, I know you've been involved both on the landline and the wireless side. What has been your experience with these kinds of things?
Well, I think it's important to bring up that there is one network, and that's the wired network, and there's just a little bit of wireless at the end of it. So the future of wireless deployment, 5G, et cetera, in the US is really, you're not going to get that deployment happen faster than the fiber infrastructure that provides the backhaul and the communications. On the wireless side, I know there's sort of wide range of challenges that some of our partners have been facing. There's at least one large city that has basically sort of stopped processing permits for wireless infrastructure deployments. And in the middle of this pandemic. And that's led to a lot of frustration in terms of issues that operators have in trying to generate new capacity by deploying new base stations. And then, I think many of communities have wireless franchise fees that can be quite large. Some of those were designed to operate for cellular operators, and fixed wireless operators have very different business models. And so that can have a number of consequences that can retard wireless infrastructure deployment, which can happen generally faster than having to trench and build. But if you can't get access to the site, if you can't get permitting, it slows everything down.
Anything to add with respect to your experience with access on the rights of way?
Go ahead.
Are you talking to me, Ron?
I was talking to you. Yes, Kelly.
Yeah. So, thank you. Just listening to what Milo and Tony and Brandon say, I completely agree with everything. First of all, we approach this as all relationship based. Behind there, the entire state and local county machines are all made up of folks that are made up of flesh and bone and got their own free will, of course, and they're working within their parameters. But we try to meet folks where they are, and we try to help them with their task, and also help them understand that we are trying to provide a service to the citizens of their community. There are challenges, of course, at the local and county and state level with permitting and getting access to the rights of way, and those challenges include fees, extensive ordinances, and in my opinion, overly technical ordinances that a lot of municipalities and counties are adopting, things of that nature. But these are all obstacles that we try to work around. Brandon and I have been to many late night city council meetings and things of that nature where we're taught, and other extracurricular activities with city council folks where we get to know them, and we let them get a sense of who we are and what we're bringing to their community. And so when you do that, it kind of paves the way a bit. Now, COVID has caused some additional challenges. Most of these folks are very worried for their health and the health of their family members, and we certainly understand and recognize that. A lot of these folks are now working from home. You'll be on calls. I'm sure everybody's been on a call where you hear children running through or dogs barking or things of that nature, and so we recognize all of that. On the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, we were able to reach out to the municipal organizations, and we worked through a lot of these issues early on, because a lot of municipalities, like all of us, were initially hitting pause on things as everybody tried to figure out how we work from home and how we process permits and receive payments and things of that nature when people are working from home. But we've approached all of those on a case-by-case basis, and we've been able to overcome a lot of those challenges. With regard to the specialized bottlenecks, that is absolutely an issue that we deal with on a daily basis. Pre-COVID and during COVID, attachment to bridges is something that we deal with on a daily basis, and we understand the engineering concerns of attaching to bridge infrastructure, especially aging infrastructure. And we always want to work with our partners there on those issues, as well as railroad crossings. We have some very good relationships with our railroad partners, including CSX, and we've been able to work through those. It just takes a personal connection and an openness and a willingness on all sides to work through these issues. And I've found that most people want to do that. So.
No, that's useful. Andrew, do you want to play mop up here and talk about it?
Yeah, sure. No, happy to do it. So from the trade association perspective at Encompass, obviously we have the obligation in representing so many different companies, different types of technology. And really we work to kind of promote those policies that ensure deployment hurdles are not so high, but instead just way more efficient and more cost effective. I think at the end of the day, we're looking at the financials for our companies that we represent and making sure that they can sustain their business and really do the best work they can for their customers. So whether it's the outreach discussing kind of the different types of franchise fees or right-of-way fees for our network builders, we're just looking for those examples so we can really bring that to the attention of the FCC, Congress, as well as the administration and the White House. So we're looking to kind of improve on that advocacy work. In the past few weeks, we've actually to kind of look at different fees from our members, trying to start a data gathering exercise to look at different jurisdictions across the country to see from whether it's permitting applications to gaining access to public right-of-ways, just to be able to kind of analyze that data to see how best we can not only interpret, use it internally, but maybe to use it for other efforts moving forward.
Let me say something real quick, Ron. To Andrew, to your point, if someone's watching this and they're a guest or they're a member but thinking about whether they should re-up their membership in Encompass, I will tell you, Andrew, Chip, Angie, Julia, everyone at Encompass is so accommodating and willing to, if I have an issue or it's an area where I'm not overly familiar, just to use that resource to be able to text Chip, and Chip immediately calls you back and talks you through things and says, well, hold on, let's get Andrew on the phone and maybe he can follow up with you or things of that nature. It's a huge help. And so I appreciate Encompass being so available like that.
Thanks, Kelly.
In terms of when you're accessing the rights, you pay the fees or whatever it is to do it. How far does an argument go where you explain to the municipality or whomever you're dealing with that the facilities you're installing really enable and stimulate additional economic activity? I think one thing certainly that the pandemic has demonstrated and illustrated to everyone just how important access to broadband is, just to keep an economy going for people that can continue to work from home, or even for city services, things like that. How far does that argument go where you say, look, let's not tax or charge us fees for this, because really what we're enabling is going to stimulate your economy, is necessary for your businesses, is really should be looked at as necessary infrastructure, and the fees and the tax revenue that you're going to generate by having policies that promote this broadband deployment really is going to improve the economy, improve tax revenue, things like that. Maybe Tony, do you want to start on this one?
Sure. Happy to. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, sure. I think it's about curating the conversation with the right people, with enough lead time to match what it is you're trying to accomplish. And that quite frankly varies substantially, city to city, state to state. But nonetheless, those are wonderful conversations to be in. And I think that, again, if the conversation's curated in a way that shows some of the advantages and some of the incentives for partnering with the folks that are deploying broadband, typically you're met with some aspects that are very positive, that either open up some roadblocks that may have affected the implementation, that may have affected the cost to do business in a particular locale. But nonetheless, those are critical conversations to be in and continually, dive into as quick as you can for any implementations or build outs that folks are working on.
Sure. Milo, anything to add with respect to that? Has that been a successful conversation, or?
Well, I would just say, at least in my experience and the partners' experiences, there's a wide range of attitudes on this. A lot of times the bigger cities are much less flexible And part of it is, they're suffering because of businesses closing, the move to remote work. You've got exodus of employees in some of these areas. So they're looking at potential tax deficits that are, lots of reductions in receipts. And it is really easy to say, well, let's just have these guys over here who are well off, companies, large companies pay more. And I think that's a real challenge, because that coupling to the quality of the infrastructure that makes their cities desirable to do business in and to live in is affected by that. And if you've got areas where you've got really bad connectivity, that's material.
Right. Yeah, no question. You even find when you travel now, if you don't have connection, it's just a major hassle to stay in touch, not only with businesses, but just with family. So it obviously it's definitely been brought home by the pandemic. Maybe switching the question just a little bit to you, Brandon. Have you found that the pandemic has incentivized localities to try to tax you more, or is it a mixed bag where some realize just how important it is and it's made it easier? Has the pandemic impacted this in any manner, or is it still, these things take so long that it's really too soon to tell whether the pandemic's had a noticeable impact on this kind of issue?
Well, it's a mixed bag, so to speak. You'll have folks that are motivated, and I'll do a shout out to the mayors, strong mayors that have gone out and had an initiative for broadband connectivity throughout, their specific jurisdiction. That has been helpful as we go to a local permitting committee with saying, here's what your mayor is saying is important to the city, and here's the value of what we're bringing in the connectivity opportunity that should be considered as you say yes or no to our permit. I think the toughest thing is that you have very outspoken, great proponents of broadband connectivity, and then you have ones that they love the idea of broadband connectivity, but they have no idea how it works. And so Tony mentioned this earlier. If you don't have, or I think Milo actually mentioned this, if you don't have that wireline infrastructure in place, you're not going to get to your wireless infrastructure. And that's just the way technology is today. It doesn't mean it won't change or evolve in the future. But a lot of our city leaders need to understand that. They need to accept it. And they need to, really lean on the industry to explain to them why we need to go into these areas, why connecting, fiber to tower connections with is important for small cells. And especially as we go forward, you have to look at this as it's not just that interim solution. You harden the network today, it's better for tomorrow. And so that investment, even if it is COVID based, it's going to be there to support services long after we, knock this COVID out of the ballpark.
Can I make one additional point to what Brandon said about small cells? We did an analysis as part of a report to the Pentagon that indicated if you wanted to deliver 5G service to 70% of US households in mid-band spectrum, not even millimeter wave spectrum, and to deliver service to one user at 100 megabits at the cell edge, you would need about 1.3 million base stations for one network to do that. Right now, I think CTIA estimates that there are something like 500,000 base stations deployed for all the carriers combined. So that indicates there's a huge gap if we're going to really have the benefits of even modestly fast 5G service available to a significant part of the US population. And that requires fiber and siting and the rest of it. And we are falling behind as a country because we can't deploy infrastructure fast enough. And that's a challenge, not just in terms of the community, but in terms of what this nation is going to be able to enjoy in terms of the benefits of telecom services compared to other nations if we don't fix it.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. Kelly, one question for you, and with respect to this issue, we talk about local obstacles, permitting, everything else. One thing that, to someone like me that doesn't really understand all the engineering that goes into it, when you're in the pandemic session, there's less traffic. The roads are more accessible. I noticed here in DC that there's an incredible amount of work going on in the rights of way. It's not just laying cables and everything else. It's fixing sewer lines, it's replacing poles, and it seems like those kinds of schedules have been accelerated. Has your company accelerated that? Has it been easier? Have you done things quicker just because of the lack of traffic? Or is it the permitting? What is the longest pole in the tent? Is it the fact that you've got to shut down traffic and get all the permits? Is it easier to do that when there's less economic activity, or is it just difficult to tell?
We have found that it is easier physically to do that now. We're building in a lot of capacity in a lot of big cities now. And the way we go in and talk about that is, look, your traffic count in 2019, September of 2019, it was this, per hour. And now it's down to literally in the teens per hour. So, let's go ahead and let's expedite everything. Let me overnight you a check. Let me get the plans to you. We have a whole team that will be available for a Zoom call. Let's walk through everything. And when can we do that? When can we get on your calendar? Can we do that in 7 days? I'll have this stuff overnighted to you on a check. Can we do this in 7 days? And get them to commit to that, and then we move from there. And that really, really works. But the key to this is, and Ron, you and I have talked about this a bunch, but every person in this whole process is a person of goodwill. I mean, these people run for city council and mayor and things of that nature because they only care about their community. That's the only reason they do this. Not certainly for the money or for the accolades or the praise. Whether you're at mayor of Tampa or Baton Rouge or New Orleans or the mayor of Fairhope, Alabama, you're doing it because you want to give back to your community. And so you go in and you talk to those people about broadband deployment, and well, we sure want that. That's something we want. And then especially in the smaller communities, these are folks that are only doing this part-time, and so they do this they have a work session on Monday night and they have a city council meeting on Wednesday night, but other than that, they're running their hardware store or practicing law or whatever. And so then they turn it over and give a larger part of the authority of running of a city to the people that are working there every day throughout the day. And so we want broadband and we're for broadband has to translate down to those folks that are actually processing and enforcing the regulations and things of that nature. So, and even in the large cities, in fact, I would say more so in the large cities, and where the mayor is a full-time person, as are all the council people. And so what I think is very important is as Tony said, you have to curate this conversation. And the way I interpret that, it means is working with your engineering department a year out, 24 months out. Okay, what are our plans for the next, 12, 24, 36, 60 months? Where do we want to be during that time period? Because that's where Kelly is going to start making Marriott reservations. I mean, if we're going to start building there, that's where I'm going to go, because I want to talk to those people. And then I have a pretty, if you're ever on a campaign staff, your candidate, you could say his speech in your sleep, because you just hear it over and over and over, every Rotary, Lions Club, all that kind of stuff. Well, that's the exact same way with what we do. Is the first thing I want to do when I talk to a community leader is I want to say, here's who we are, here's what we do, and here's how we do it. You're never going to get to 5G. You hear about 5G all the time. You see it on the sidelines at the Super Bowl. What does it mean? And how do you get there? And so we talk about all of that. and we talk about the things that have to happen to get you to that. And if those things don't happen now, if you're not increasing capacity now, then that's just going to pass you by, and it's going to pass your community by. And then that means less connectivity for, closing the homework gap, which is now a forefront issue at the FCC. That means less in industrial recruitment. I mean, that means less folks moving into your community or staying in community. It means lower property values. What we're seeing now is lots of purchase agreements that are produced by the county board of realtors has a box on it for when you're selling or buying a house where you can see that the buyer checks internet access available in this neighborhood. So that's something that people are looking for, especially now is they're trying to educate their children from home or working from home more. And, I think that more people are going to be working from home even after we, kill the pandemic. So these are all issues that you have to start at the top. You have to educate those leaders at the top. And then once you've established that relationship and they understand really what you're talking about, then you're able to take the conversation to the next step to talk about, and now how do we do that? Well, we do that with permitting, and here's what we're going to do in your city. And so how do we expedite that and minimize cost and work with your community to make sure that we're not tearing up sidewalks and we are not impeding traffic at noon on a Tuesday and things of that nature. And we're working those routes and all of that. And that's when you really start building that relationship with those permitting folks. But you do it now because you're going to need that relationship and that understanding from those folks in 24 months when your SVP of network says, okay, now we're building through that area. Yeah. So it's important to have that outlook and that good relationship within your company to find out what they want to do and then get out to those folks and explain that.
And hey, Ron, on a sort of more of a somber note, we've had the opportunity, we've seen exactly what you identified as this influx of road infrastructure projects, especially along major transportation corridors. It's been unfortunate that we go in and we ask, can we trench when you trench? Can we have our workers come in when your workers are in? And this has been something that it seems unfair and illogical, but the answer is no, that they have an RFP. That RFP included the scope of work that was going to happen. If they involve another third party, then that scope of work changes and potentially the contract's costs could go up to the county, city, municipality. We've gone so far as to say we will pay those incremental costs if in fact you face those. But there's still a level of we would rather get this done and then allow you to come through next, which you and me both know that's not efficient. So where we even try to partnership, and it's not always, there are those roadblocks where you see a bridge project, for example, going in. They're restructuring the bridge. We could be right there next to them, hanging that conduit on the side of the bridge, making sure they understand actually what that load requirement looks like physically. And sometimes we don't have that opportunity. And that's just one simple example of how in the pandemic, all these road projects, they're not including all of the utilities that are along those road projects in upgrading facilities.
No, that's a fair point. Andrew, it strikes me that Encompass sits at a really interesting kind of nexus where you can hear from your membership about all these issues. Kelly talked a little bit about what Encompass can do with that, but what does the trade group do in terms of taking these issues and turning it into policy advocacy, as well as trying to come up with ways to advocate for the removal of these barriers on behalf of its membership?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Yeah, so I think a big part of what Kelly was saying and really what's fundamental to our work is hearing from them, but also how do we start those conversations? So we really look at kind of recommendations and policy ideas of how best to solve some of these solutions. And a big part of our work this past year was creating a broadband blueprint kind of roadmap. And if anyone hasn't had the chance to read it yet, it can be found on the INCOMPAS website. So definitely encourage our viewers to take a look. But the paper really titled The Broadband Blueprint, How to Achieve Universal Availability. And we're kind of look at those different hurdles and fundamentally look at kind of how the government federally can start sending funds to help kind of build out the networks and asking Congress to make $100 billion available in federal funding. So we hope to see this soon in infrastructure legislation that could be kind of down in the next couple of months. But we just want to ensure that funding is really allocated to the right areas. It's going to the communities that need it the most and kind of has the trickle down effect of attracting more investment for deployments in the future. So on top of kind of asking for the financial support, and I'll kind of go through several of our policy recommendations, and this has kind of been our advocacy push in the last few months and will continue to be kind of our agenda moving forward so we can help address kind of common challenges that we face as an industry. But the 6 basic principles that we bring up is 1, adding networks, not fees. We believe that any new funding for broadband, specifically funds appropriated from Congress, state and local governments, are being based on more equitable contributions and reflect the fact that investments made in broadband benefit the entire economy. So any new public support is basically financed from general taxpayer funds. 2, that we've kind of heard and discussed at the local, state and local level, is streamlined deployment. We see, just as was mentioned in our conversation this morning, just a lot of roadblocks associated with building out networks. And we hear that from our members every day. So we believe it's critical for our policymakers to adopt those policies that promote more transparent, streamlined approval processes that really help support reasonable and cost-based right-of-way fees. So deployments can be more efficient, timely, and cost-effective. 3 is our push for an internet for all. Here we support that any funds targeted are going to those areas that need it the most, particularly the unserved and underserved areas, just to ensure that communities who have been left behind are served. 4, I think really we need to have better data and mapping, as a lot of us have mentioned. So just hoping our leaders depend on more reliable data and verifiable maps, just to make better determinations on where any federal funding is being used to deploy. And then 5, let's see, we want to, again, encourage competition for funding. As we've seen with the reverse auction, it's been a great introduction for how to kind of use federal, or not federal, but ratepayer money to bring billions of dollars to those rural communities that had little to no access. So there's great promise here, but we know there still needs to be more done on improving kind of the transparency and oversight of these auctions, so any awarded obligations can be fully met. And 6, finally, just to kind of future-proof our networks, we believe the FCC should explicitly allow wireless providers to use their reimbursement funds to future-proof their networks by purchasing Open RAN compatible equipment. With the FCC's recent findings that replacing certain Chinese-made equipment costs about $1.84 billion, I think we believe right now is just a critical moment to secure and widen our mobile network supply chain just through more cost-effective Open RAN model. So these are just several ideas that we've pitched in our paper. And again, I encourage everyone to read the paper if you have the chance, and really feel free to use it and share with others. It's something we're proud of. It represents everything that we've supported as an industry, and embodies kind of our association's own policies to promote more competition, pushing for faster speeds at the 1 gigabit speed, with more innovation and encouraging more private investment and economic development for building our networks. So hopefully that kind of answers that. But you know,
No, it does.
obviously,
That's great, and people can read more about it, I'm sure, on your
yeah.
website and see the old presentation. In terms of successful broadband deployments and kind of policies that promote that, we had at the federal level under the former Chairman Pai some efforts to streamline broadband deployments. We have one touch, make ready, dig once, things like that. Brandon, why don't we start with you? Are there policies like that? Like I think dig once, for example, is probably something that you would be helpful with respect to the problem you identified in terms of accessing the rights of way when there's other construction going on and things like that. Can you point to maybe something you can hide the names of the innocent or the guilty, but relate an experience where a build went really well and why you think it went well? Like what policies may have contributed to that?
Yeah, so we can look at the state of Florida. We're building out a vast network there, and it's from the top to the bottom and the east and the west. They had a state bill that passed that basically aimed its efforts with modernizing what small cell implementation would look like in those areas. As you know, there was a brief mention of both wireless and wireline inside of the FCC's original order. We utilize that to really connect the dots and say, look, without this infrastructure, you're not going to be able to get this infrastructure. So we had several cities that really got it. I'll point out one that's, I can't say the name, but they're in the central region and to the east side of the state. They just got it. They were there with obstacles. We had some permitting issues with our vendor who was turning in permits on our behalf, but they were there. They said, come in and meet with us. Let's do a pre-review, like Kelly mentioned, of what your intentions are. We're end to end inside of our municipality. And it really works seamlessly. And when you talk about customer delivery, we over delivered and under promised in those areas. Now, the flip side to that, now we have areas in the network where they must be connected because, as you've heard, a network is a network. It's a ubiquitous network that traverses the area in which you need to connect services. Now we have and it goes right back to what I was mentioning earlier. It's in Florida, by the way, where there are these road projects, and I mean, they're extensive. These things were in the hopper 10 years ago and they never got funded. And then somehow now it's time to get them funded, and we're unable to, work. And when I say unable to work, they're saying that we're going to be on a year-long delay. And there's no discussion. Can we do a temporary solution? Can we go aerial until, your road project is done? There's really, really been a roadblock. Yet you have sister communities that are doing a great job of making sure that connectivity traverses through their municipality. And so what's important there to learn is that it's not always a one size fits all. We always go and build where we can, but we also have to be cognizant that if you don't build it in its entirety, it's not going to mean that much to these customers that need all of that connectivity. And we've utilized things like our DHS letter during COVID with special access, naming the importance of wireless, wireline, broadband services to the community. We've threatened, we've all the tricks in the bag that you can think of, but the bottom line is, I think it goes back to what Kelly honed in on. If you don't work with them well now, you're not going to be able to work with them well in the future. So we're trying not to go down these legal routes. We're trying to find solutions, trying to set new expectations for the customer, trying to find maybe we can lease fiber from another provider, which is very expensive, and it was not something that we ever thought we needed to do because we have a right to be within the public rights of way. But we are looking at those solutions. So that's one state example. If you want to go to the all the way to the West Coast, we notice that all the time. You'll have some communities in the West Coast that really do embrace connectivity. You'll find some tribes on the West Coast that actually appreciate the opportunity to have any type of connectivity in their area. And so we need to just bring it all together. And I think that's where my ask would be of this conversation is for the federal government, whether it be through legislation or through actions at the FCC, they really do treat wireline services just as important to the basis of broadband network as they have for wireless services.
No, that's helpful. Is there anyone else that would like to weigh in on that? Tony, did you have something you wanted to weigh in on this particular issue?
Yeah, I think there's, talking specifics, I think One Touch Make Ready was a giant leap forward. I think it moved conversations off-centered that were quite frankly cemented in bureaucracy from city to city. And I would just say that, the evolution, let me back up a little bit and say the adoption of One Touch Make Ready isn't consistent everywhere. But One Touch Make Ready has done a little bit more for our industry than just at the local levels. I think, quite frankly, it's helped operator to operator become more efficient and more fluid in deployments where there's multiple comms in a given area. So, good example. I think, though, on the One Touch Make Ready that, it was a great first leap. I think some of the piece parts that are out there are absolutely wonderful and certainly helped us all. But we need to continue to focus on the evolution of what One Touch Make Ready looks like with regards to what we now see some of the local municipalities engaging in the way of restructuring fees and so on and so forth. So very happy with One Touch Make Ready and would be, just a continual advocate of looking at ways to understand how policy impacts reality and then keeping the conversation open to improving policy to, make our deployments more efficient and consistent across the country.
Anyone else that would like to weigh in on that before we move on? Good. We're coming kind of towards the end here, so I would like just to talk about the fact that we have a new acting chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel, at the commission. She's obviously very focused on broadband too. In fact, her first open meeting, 3 of the 5 agenda items are devoted to broadband. One of them has to do with E-rate, using E-rate funds to support remote learning. Another has to do with distribution of money to help the emergency broadband benefit program, which would help people pay for access to broadband. What's interesting about these initiatives is they somewhat address the demand side in terms of helping people pay for it, whereas when we've seen the FCC before with the funds that they set up is really more on the supply side, where they incentivize people to do a reverse auction to build networks, and then with the thought that build it and they will come. What's your thought just generally? You could speak specifically about these first agenda items of the commissioner, of the chairwoman, or of just the idea of demand versus supply, this idea that if you give direct subsidies to people and then they can spend those dollars how they want, is that an effective way potentially to spur broadband deployment, maybe even more efficient in some ways than spurring supply? Milo, I don't think you've had the chance to go first. Do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I would say I think there are areas where it's just not going to be possible to close an economically positive model. And in those areas, subsidizing users is the most straightforward way of dealing with it. I think competition can be brought to bear in a number of ways to sort of lower the cost, as well as if you streamline permitting, you're going to lower the cost of deploying networks as well. So I think it's not one size fits all. I will say, from a wireless perspective, spectrum is really important. And, the FCC took a bunch of work did a bunch of work to get more unlicensed spectrum out in the 6 gigahertz band. I think that's going to be very useful, not just for um, indoor wireless deployments for Wi-Fi, et cetera, but potentially also for fixed wireless deployments at the edge, particularly in rural areas. The most recent C-band auction, however, I think is a really tragic outcome, where you've got north of $85 billion going into the federal coffers that could have been spent on fiber backhaul, on new base station deployments, and a whole set of other criteria.
Interesting that you mentioned that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just remembered there was an article in the Financial Times where Eric Schmidt was talking about the fact that you've spent 85 billion on airwaves, but now you don't have any money to deploy it, or less money to do so. And that's the issue that you're kind of identifying here.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is, $85 billion would have gotten you a multi-gigabit mobile network to like 80% of US households. And instead it's going into the federal government, where deficit spending is in the trillions of dollars range. So it's not like that's a good trade. And I think there are many ways that you could have structured that auction in a way that would have focused it on build out at the expense of proceeds going into the US government. And I think right now, particularly post-COVID, where you need stimulus, you need new jobs to deploy infrastructure. We're in a race with China that we're losing. That auction was a very big missed opportunity. And I think there's more spectrum that can be brought to bear, hopefully in ways that incentivize deployment as opposed to raising proceeds to the government.
Yeah. Kelly, you didn't have a chance to weigh in on the last topic. Do you have any thoughts in terms of spurring demand, or what maybe Chairwoman Rosenworcel should focus on with respect to this issue?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got statewide lobbyists in most every state where we are, actively building fiber. And so as the COVID funds, these relief monies were distributed out to the states, I was on the phone with all of our folks saying, look, I want to know what these legislatures are going to do relative to broadband connectivity, if anything. And I want you to push for, that to be a consideration. And we did actively push for that. And so let me just give you a quick little thumbnail of how that happened in a couple of states. First of all, not every state heeded our call that some of that money should be put to broadband connectivity. So a lot of states just use that money to cover budget shortfalls, which in my opinion is a short-sighted way to look at that. But, if you're a legislator staring down the, barrel of proration or something of that nature, I guess I can understand that argument. But nevertheless, so for example, in one state, the approach was, let's figure out a way to get money directly to unserved or underserved folks in communities where there is little to no connectivity. We could figure out a way to get that to them. Okay. Well, in my opinion, that turned into a very, Rube Goldberg-esque machine type of system of, well, we're going to send out a survey, and then the people in the home would have to fill out the survey and send it back, and then we would issue them a coupon that they could then take to their local provider to have, all of it. And it did not go over well, because that's just too many steps, and it's too much. And because folks are living their daily lives, they're trying to make a living during the pandemic, and raise their kids and things of that nature. And in addition to that, you are talking about a community. It'd be like saying, we are going to give you the best iPhone there is, iPhone 14. We're going to give you the top of the line. It's got the best cameras and everything else. Well, but I live, way out in a rural area where there's zero connectivity. Well, then you might as well just be giving them a doorstop. So you can give them folks the money or the technology, but if there's nothing that it can connect to, then what's the reason for doing that? Right. So conversely, one of the states that got a large amount of this money, they developed a broadband program and where they work with providers. It's not a giveaway. They want you to have skin in the game. So they'll match you dollar for dollar. They allowed providers to pick 3 census blocks, typically, counties in rural parts of their state. And then you made a proposal, and this was all front loaded, very fast. I mean, like you had to, they stood up the program in July. You had to pick your census blocks in late July. You knew by August 10th, I believe, if you had an award, and then you had to have it built out by December 31st. And they were constantly going to be meeting with you and auditing to make sure that you could do that. And so we were able to work with them on and take what would have been a $6 million program for us and make that a $3 million program. At a $6 million level, our bean counters wouldn't approve this deployment. At $3 million, it became very doable. And what we were able to do is discuss with them the fact that while we're not connecting folks directly in their homes, we're increasing capacity by a massive amount in rural communities. And so not only will it help them now, but a couple of years from now, little communities that would never have gotten any kind of 5G connectivity will be totally on the front line and ready to go with that. So that's I think a better use of these public funds. You create a partnership, you make sure everybody's got skin in the game, and then you look at it from top to bottom, from middle mile all the way down to connecting someone in their home. And so I think that's the better way to look at it. I mean, of course, we all support the idea of everyone being connected across the country. And on the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, we've always talked about what are the main hurdles. And the main hurdles are obviously money, and the kind of money that Congress has been sloshing around the country in the last year, and what we anticipate that they will do over the next year. I think it's going to be enough to close the gap completely, but we just have to be very wise about how we use, these public funds that are, paid for by the taxpayer.
Fantastic. So we are officially at the end of the panel, but I am told by those in charge that we have more time. So we have a bonus round here for those that decide to stick around. I want to go to Andrew for in a second, but what I'd like the panelists to think about before while Andrew answers this next question is maybe a little bit of a extended lightning round where I go around to each of you and ask you if you could call one person in this new administration, whether it's Jessica Rosenworcel, whether it's someone on the Hill, whether it's the new Department of Commerce person who most likely will be Gina Raimondo, governor of the great state of Rhode Island, who would you call and why to solve the broadband deployment problem, and what would it be? So if you would think about that while I turn to Andrew and ask Andrew, in terms of Encompass's thinking of policies to promote with this new FCC, what do you think will resonate? Where are some avenues for your membership to make some headway on these kinds of issues?
Yeah, so thanks, Ron. Yes, next steps, and we're going to continue to push our paper, introducing kind of these ideas for achieving universal broadband availability in the U.S. But I think it all starts with building that coalition, as we discussed, having those relationships with other industry associations, other consumer and public interest groups. So on that note, we've been actively engaged on the new FCC's Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, having calls with different associations, different consumer public interest groups to get everyone's kind of position, their views on what can be brought up so that non-ETCs are involved, are participating. There's more competition in the program. So we're actively engaged on that type of work, also, as well as you know, trying to bring possible reforms to Lifeline and E-rate, I think, as you noted before in one of your questions. So again, just building on our main goals behind the blueprint paper on pushing universal broadband availability as well as affordability. And I know there's a lot of potential to do work here in the upcoming administration. Their agenda is focused on broadband, getting more internet access to people all across the country. And, you know, obviously we have a good position to be part of that. And obviously want to engage our members to still participate, to hear from them. And, you know, we'll do our best to push both legislative and regulatory advocacy in ways that we feel meet our agenda.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, for the lightning round, Tony, I don't know if you've had enough time to think about it, but it is a surprise question, so I apologize, but no. What do you think? Who would you call?
No worries. No, I think it's important that we work with our new commissioner. I think my components there of importance really rally around working in two speeds, and that would be around plugging gaps for short-term issues. So we're all perfectly familiar with the impact COVID has had on society. One example of that would be on the homework gap that we mentioned a moment ago, in using a demand side model that works well for the short term, but then also working in another speed to think about the longer term solution. And so, you know, we see any number of opportunities with existing customer bases, and quite frankly, more so going forward, to think about what the long-term deployment of security and network access to bandwidth looks like from a homework perspective on the E-rate, within the E-rate program. So to me, those are, you know, key principles to work in, again, in two speeds: for the short term holes that need to be filled for the moment that we're in as a society, but then a longer term vision for how we need to go about coming out of the pandemic with a broadband plan that really fills our gaps longer term.
We need to do more than one thing. We have to do a couple things simultaneously, importantly, to make bridges happen. Brandon, how about yourself? Who are you thinking about? I was going to say Ghostbusters, but you look a little too young maybe to go there.
I'm going to call INCOMPAS. That's who I'm going to call. But no, I would really, because I know everyone's going to speak to other folks that have a direct policy input, I really think we need to engage the White House. I think we have an opportunity with a new president, a new vice president, to make sure that as they see the digital divide, as their work within those that they're directing at both the agency and the legislative level unfolds, that they have a better or a clear understanding of what those issues are. And I think that's why, you know, jokingly, I said INCOMPAS. INCOMPAS will help us do that. These are not just, you know, tenets of let's go and meet with, you know, the Democrats or the Republicans. This is really, how do we fix this for the entire country? So as I think of universal broadband for every American, I think, you know, I would go straight to the top, and hopefully those messages trickle down to those that are in the policy space.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to go to you next. I'm going to save Google for last because Google always has the last word. Kelly, what's your thought?
Well, you know, it's such a hyper-partisan, crazy time we're living in. Hopefully it's getting a little more calm, but at least it seems like in our space it's a little less heated. And so I think our calls, and we're already making those calls, are to Senator Cantwell and Senator Schatz. We think we worked so well with Senator Wicker, thanks in a huge part to INCOMPAS, of course, and Senator Thune. I think that'll be a lot of our thrust there, is to continue to work with our friends in the Senate on both sides of the aisle. both Senator Cantwell and Senator Schatz, I believe, completely get it with reference to how we have to make sure that our government on all levels, but especially the federal level, is, that this is the way to national defense and to keeping us in the front lines of world economies, is only through communications and looking for ways to break down those barriers and make sure that we're able to deploy everything that we need to carry us forward into the 21st century. And they are now running that show, and I get a sense that they are going to be great to work with in that regard.
Great, thank you. Milo?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's fair to say that Google always gets the last word.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just meant from the search bar. That's all.
Okay.
I didn't mean in policy debates. That's all.
No, that's fine. I would just say, this is going to sound a little weird, but the new head of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, is the nuclear weapon of federal policy. And what we can get from, if the federal government were to act coherently, whether it's defense, transportation, highway administration, interior, if they were all directed to make American broadband infrastructure be the leader in the world for both wireless and wireline services, and the federal government acted coherently on rights of way, on access, on spectrum, we could accomplish amazing things. And OMB is the vehicle to enforce that. It's not a scalpel, it's an axe. But I think that would be who I would talk to.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Well, thank you all for joining the panel and spending time today to talk about these issues. I know I learned a lot. I hope the audience did as well. Thanks to Encompass for hosting. And there's a great program. Are we the actual last? But I think there's actually some more panels after us today. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.